Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about numbers. Hopefully you've heard a little something about them. I know, crazy. Math and numbers, who would have ever thought? So if you haven't heard about them, you should probably come see me and we'll try to get something figured out. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a lot of numbers that you're familiar with and we're going to classify them into different sets. The reason for this is so that we will be able to communicate more effectively about the different groups of numbers. So to begin, we're going to start with ones that you're most familiar with, counting numbers. These are numbers that you use to count everyday objects. These are also called natural numbers. So that's something you might want to write down. Counting and natural are the same thing. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is the next set of numbers. This is going to be whole numbers. Whole numbers are very similar to counting numbers because they include counting numbers. The only difference that we have is the zero. So if you'll take a little bit of time to notice, I'm going to give you a little tidbit to help you remember the difference between whole and counting numbers. Whole numbers, in the word whole, there is the letter O, which is really similar to a zero. So this is just something to help you remember what it is that we are talking about. Next we have integers. Integers yet again include whole numbers and counting numbers. The only difference now is that we are adding on negative numbers. So when you think about counting, I hope you're not going to count with negatives. If you do, that's yet again something we need to talk about. So integers are by themselves, they are negative numbers. Next we have rational numbers. So rational numbers are ones that we can write as fractions, So another thing that I'm going to give you guys is a little help here. When we think about rational numbers, the word rational includes the word ratio, which ratio is a fraction. So this is just another way to help you remember. Some examples we've got here are -3/2. Rational, we have to have the opposite also, which is irrational. An irrational number is one that you cannot write as a fraction. It is a non-repeating decimal. So some examples are going to be the square root of 3 pi. These are not included in the rational numbers. These are not ones that will be integers or whole numbers or counting numbers. It's a completely different deal. All of these numbers together are known as real numbers. So real numbers are anything that can be on the number line. So let's take a little bit, I know that's a lot of information, let's practice this. So some examples that we have is, how would you classify 0? Well, we know that it's going to be a whole number based off of our nifty little trick. O gives us whole. But the next thing that we need to consider is a whole number is a part of an integer. Therefore, it's also an integer. An integer is part of a rational number, so it's rational and it's also real. These are all different classifications for 0. The next example that we have is -9. So this is a negative number. Which one had negatives in it? Do I count with negatives? No. Whole, there's something to do with the 0, so I'm going to say no. Integers. Integers is the one that has negative numbers, so this is an integer number. If it is an integer, it is also a rational and a real number. Next, we have an example that's including a square root. Well, when I looked through this slideshow, square roots were a rational number. So shouldn't this be irrational? Not exactly. You want to make sure that square roots cannot be simplified. So this particular one can simplify down to 2. When we think about 2, we want to start back. Is that something I count with? Yes. Well, if I count with it, it's probably a whole number, and it's probably an integer, probably a rational, and it is most definitely a real number. Next, we have another square root, the square root of 11. So this is one that if I think about simplifying it, I don't know the square root on the top of my head. So what I want to do is plug it into my calculator. When you plug it into your calculator, you're going to get 3 point something, 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 something. And it's going to keep going on and on and on. The reason why is because it is a non-repeating decimal. Therefore, the square root of 11 will be classified as an irrational number. That's it, guys.